Buonasera, benvenuti alla Casa Italiana Zerilli Marimo della New York University. It's a great pleasure to have you here for the second Adventure in Italian Opera with Fred Plotkin for this season. And we are delighted to have a myth and a legend of opera with us tonight. Normally, Fred has the pleasure and the honor to introduce his guest, and he will do that tonight. But I think my colleagues did such a great job in synthesizing the importance of this evening on our Facebook page that I'm just going to read what they wrote on the page. And it is 650 performances at the Met, 16 new productions, 7 opening nights, 10 national telecasts, and 1 night at Casa Italiana. For now. So please join me in welcoming Fred Plotkin and Cheryl Milnes.
There we go.
So just to make it clear, I'm the myth and he's the legend. Welcome all of you. I'm not a tenor. I would be a baritone if I sang, but with people like this, I never would attempt to be a baritone. Really welcome to all of you, and welcome especially to Cheryl Milnes, one of the artists I've most wanted to have on this stage in the years that I've done this. I don't think he requires too much introduction. I'll only say we were at the Met, you were at the Met for a very long time. I was at the Met for 9 of those years. Our paths didn't cross that much, primarily because I was sent artists who had needs, and you didn't have any needs. You had it all, and you were loved at the Met and self-sufficient, and had you had a need, it would have been sent to me, but we didn't have much contact. And I'm glad to do this now. The last time I saw you, actually, was a few years ago in Washington. You must have been working at the Kennedy Center. I was, and I was crossing Virginia Avenue in front of the Watergate, and you were coming from the Kennedy Center, and I was going there, and I said, Cheryl Milnes, and you said, I used to be.
Once upon a time, right? Once upon a time.
And I could only say that you still are, and it's really an honor, and let's get right to the music because I want to talk about a lot of things, so thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Yeah.
It's great to be here, to see all these people. My son, his fiance in the front row, and Fabrizio Milano, a name that you may know, apologized. He called me earlier today. He has a bad cold and couldn't come. And apropos of that, if I have to cough a little bit, I'm at the tail end of a cold. I was just judging a competition in China. That's a long run.
It is a long run.
And no place you've ever heard of, Ningbo. Ningbo, which is
Ningbo.
About 3 hours from Shanghai. And just came back a few days ago and got something there. And I'm over it, but still a little bit of cough hanging on. So you'll forgive me if you say something complimentary and I cough.
So I'm going to start with a detail I didn't discuss with you. Many of you know that I wrote a book called Opera 101, A Complete Guide to Learning and Loving Opera. It is the standard text in America for opera education. And when I had to pick the first opera to teach and the recording that I would teach it on, it was actually a very easy decision. Many people said you should do a Mozart or Bohème and so on. I said, no, it should be Rigoletto. because Rigoletto to me is the perfect opera. And to me, the perfect recording starred Cheryl Milnes as Rigoletto. A team with Joan Sutherland was Gilda, your daughter. Luciano Pavarotti was the Duke of Mantua, your boss. And
The Decca Group.
the Decca
The
Group.
London Decca Group.
The
yeah.
London Decca Group.
That was Joan
And
Luciano.
it is, to me, still, there are many fine recordings of Rigoletto. It's still the one that I always teach with. I had to buy a new CD recently because the old one wore out from use. And
Thank you. Thank you.
so it really is that good. And I just thought I will start with some audio. Julian, please play number one, so you can hear what is really so extraordinary about this. So if you please, Cortigiani, Il razzo
Cortigiani, il razza andato, per quel prezzo vendeste il mio bene. A voi nulla e loro sconviene, ma mia figlia impagare il tesor. La rendete, o secur diservata, questa man per voi forra cruenta. Nulla in terra più nuovo paventa, se dei figli difendeva. Quella porta, assassini, assassini, aprite la porta, assassini, aprite. Voi tutti, come contro, venite, tutti contro me. Bene, io piango, Marunno, Signore. Tu con l'alma gentil come il cuore, dimmi tu dove l'hanno nascosta, Marunno, Signore. Dimmi tu dove l'hanno nascosta, là, non è vero, e là, non è vero, e là, non è vero. Signori, perdono pietate, al vegliardo la figlia ridate, ridonarla voi nulla costa, a voi nulla ora costa. Tutto al mondo al figlio per me. Signori, perdono, pietà. Tutto al mondo
What's especially interesting, I haven't listened to that recording in a long time, so I can listen to it as a third person. You know, I know it's me. Intellectually, I know it's me. But emotionally, I can analyze it, good, bad, you know, stuff that turns, whatever, the timings, all of that stuff. I can listen to it as though it's somebody else. But time has to go by to be able to do that. You can't do that the week after or even maybe the year after. And this was, what did we talk about?
1971. Yeah.
What, I don't know. My math, I flunked math. But,
Cheryl Milnes is only the second artist in all the years that I've done this who's turned to me or whispered to me during music and saying, "That's good." The first was Morella Frainie, so you're in good company.
she was also good.
She was
She
good,
is.
yeah. Yeah.
In fact, is, although not in such good health right now.
No,
but-
unfortunately.
Yeah.
We send your love, say, ci sta ascoltando Mirella. I obviously did research in preparation for this conversation and was astonished to discover that in your first year at the Met, you made your debut on December 22nd, 1965. You sang 9 different roles. Valentin and Faust, Yeletsky in Queen of Spades, Don Fernando in Fidelio, Amonasro in Aida, Jack Rance in Fanchula del West, suddenly forgot his name in Ballo, your baritone anchor.
Renato.
Renato, grazie.
Somebody canceled.
Oh, that's why.
A bunch of these were cancellations.
Uh-huh, okay, but this is
I
what
can
I'm gonna
tell
get
you
to.
who.
And Enrico and Lucia di Lammermoor, the High Priest and Samson Delilah, and Escamillo and Carmen. That's in the space of 7 months. Now,
I was hustling.
but really I want to ask, how does an artist, even a young artist, get all of those roles in his head and get them rehearsed and
I have no idea. I mean, you walk around with
Yeah.
earphones and, you know, it just constantly going, doing
because
it.
that's a huge range from French to German to Russian.
The Yeletsky, however, you know,
English?
Mr. Bing, we don't know why. Mr.
Yeah.
Bing did all of the Slavic operas in English.
In English, yeah.
So back then, Yeletsky,
Yeah.
Queen of Spades, was in English.
Right.
The first Russian, Onegin was also in English
Mm-hmm.
back then. Then in the late 80s, I think, we did it in Russian.
Sure. What struck me, and I want to ask you a question about this, and Julian, by the way, is set up number 2. The first 4 conductors you worked with at the Met were Georges Pret, Thomas Shippers, Carl Berman, Zubin Mehta. And it reminded me of something that Renata Scotto in this chair said to me a few years ago. I asked her, what did you learn about acting and drama from the stage directors you worked with? She said, absolutely nothing. I learned everything from conductors. And so I'll ask you the same question. What did you learn from stage directors and what did you learn from conductors, especially when you start with a foursome like those?
Well, it's hard to analyze tasty musical things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you pick stuff up. Zubin, one of the great conductors, all of these people. Böhm, although older at the time, still was one of the big trio, the old trio of Karajan and Bernstein and Böhm. But she was being cute. She wasn't being totally honest. Because if you work with a Zeffirelli, who also, we're going to lose him pretty soon. He's not in good shape. But I learned tons of stuff from Zeffirelli. And who's the Brit who was the
Peter Hall?
who Matt
John
was
Dexter?
John Dexter.
Yeah, okay.
I learned a lot from John. An interesting thing, John was not a big linguist.
Right.
And he did Ballo in Hamburg. It was in Italian. He didn't speak German or Italian. I was the only American. I was the only English speaker in the cast. So he had to have a translator. They had translators, no problem. But he sought me out constantly because I was the one to whom he could just communicate because it was common language. And I learned a ton from John. I was also a good sponge. In some ways, that was one of my best, qualities,
Attributes, yeah.
attributes. People would say something, I'd hear anybody. We were talking about that earlier. I would hear somebody say something, oh, I'm going to do that. That's good. And I made it mine, and I did it, sitting with a Corelli or a Richard Tucker or Bergonzi or we just lost Nikolai. All of these guys sitting there in a row, musical rehearsal. You heard them phrase a certain way. Where did they get it? I didn't know where they got it. If I liked it, well, that's part of any business, not just singing, not just music, but learn. Somebody says something smart, do it, take it.
So let's pick Zeffirelli, and what did you learn from him?
Well, Franco, I put stage directors in three groups: the homework director, the flair director, and the combination of the two. Franco was a flair director. He would say, sing me this page, and he would do it. He would act it. He didn't have a plan. Other guys, they came in with a plan. That's what I call the homework guys. They had it all written out. Okay, there, and you sit at the table, and you had flowers and the sword and that, to eat that. They had it all worked out, and then you refined it as you rehearsed. The best were the combinations. So that would be Tito Capobianco, whom we just lost as well. Titone, as I called him.
Yep.
He called me, well, I'm still in touch with his sons.
Yeah.
He didn't tell anybody about his cancer.
Yes, I know.
Even his sons, even
Really?
Danilo and Renato, Danny and Nato, as they call themselves. They didn't even know. And we were very close. I did, can't imagine how many, 20 or 30 different operas with Tito Capobianco for the first time. In Chile, in Argentina, and in Cincinnati, and the Met, and Chicago, and then all of the place. Wonderful stage director. I probably learned more from Tito. But watching Franco, well, I'll use the verb improvise, because you'd sing something and watch his body language. Again, my good sponge quality. I could see what he was doing. Oh, that's good. If I didn't like it, well, a phrase came up between us, and he liked it. He said, well, I had said this to him. He said, I like that phrase. Don't do what I say, do what I mean. Well, it sounds like double talk,
No. Yeah.
but there's real meaning in there. Try to get inside what somebody is intending to say. Another great stage director, Ponel, Jean-Pierre Ponel, was a great stage director. I learned a lot. Rigoletto in San Francisco was the first time, but then Salzburg, Giovanni's. And his ego was in the right place with a lot of stage directors and conductors. Their egos are so strong, you don't dare be negative to them. And I remember in the Giovanni, he had an idea for the serenade in Giovanni in Salzburg. And it wasn't resonating with me. I couldn't do it. And I said to him, I'm not really understanding. It sounds like a good idea, but I'm not understanding what you want. Can I sing it for you and you show me what you want? I said, okay. So we got about halfway through the first verse, daga, 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 da, bum, bim, daga, daga, the serenade, Giovanni. About halfway through the first verse, he stopped and said, this isn't working, is it? Well, I mean, how many stage directors would say that? Said, this isn't working, we got to find something else. Well, that was great.
Yep.
I loved it.
Julian, I'm going to ask you to switch from number 2 to number 5. And when you're ready, please play it.
A proposito. This is because he didn't like a bunch of twins.
Davanti agli occhi tuoi
But he doesn't succeed. Second verse.
Che il zucchero porti in mezzo al cuore. Non esser gioia mia con me crudele. Lasciati almen veder mio bel amore.
So go back to number 2, Julian, but first we'll talk.
I just whispered that there's a little story there. The band, not
Mandolin.
banjo, guitar,
Mandolin.
Thank you. The mandolin player was Austrian, and Böhm, of course, was Austrian, and he was, at that age, pretty dour looking. Although he liked me, he could be quite awesome, especially
Yes.
to another Austrian. And somehow they made a mistake. They put the mandolin player just right below it. If this is the conductor, the mandolin player was just there. Rehearsals. Well, she was playing wrong notes all over the place. She was, just scared to death of this guy right above her. So finally, they got the bright idea of putting her way over in the corner, and then she played beautifully, as you just heard. That she was just scared to death of. He could be tough.
So I'm going to go back now to this, my favorite opera recording of all, this Rigoletto, the Act 2 duet with Joan Sutherland, of which we're just going to hear 3 minutes and 18 seconds. What I want to ask you about regarding this is I was honored to know Sutherland and Richard Bonning very well and spent a lot of time with them and adored both of them. But they would never quite answer a question that I wanted to know, which was that it was always reputed that he conducted to her needs and everybody else had to go along with that. I didn't think so, frankly, because I found his recordings and his live performances so exciting, and not just for her, but everyone. And so we're just going to play a bit of this, and then I want you in the audience to listen to the conducting as well as the singing. So Julian, number 2, please.
Alcun da fuori alla chiesa ti seguiva mai nessuno?
Mai, Rigoletto,
Se talor tutti ti han guardatevi d'aprire,
nemmeno tu.
non che altri a lui. Mia figlia di
Sua figlia.
veglio Mia figlia
So the conduct.
That's for all of them.
Yeah, the conducting.
That's for all of them.
Yeah. I find Bonning's conducting always thrilling, and it was never, he was too modest to say this, but it was never about serving Joan Sutherland at the expense of her colleagues, in part because she was so invested in having good colleagues, in my view.
All of that.
Yeah.
He coached her, of course, tremendously outside of the recording session or the performing, even the first rehearsals. He coached her, so she was, in a sense, doing his music. He was a great musician, still is a great musician. In fact, some of my friends in London look after him as the Brits talk about that. They look after an artist. And he's reputed to have said, I can't understand it. Joan is gone and they're still hiring me.
Last time I saw him, I took him to lunch a couple of years ago in New York on October 10th, which is Verdi's birthday. And I thought we would talk about Verdi a bit. It was not an interview, it was just lunch among the two of us. And he said, you know, you're very thoughtful to have taken me to lunch today on October 10th. And I thought he meant Verdi's birthday. It turned out that was the day that Joan Sutherland had died. So that I can't say that I knew that and did it purposely, but I was very glad to keep him company and talk about music on that day. Julian, sit at number 3, please. When I wrote Opera 101, as I said, I only picked 11 operas to teach completely, Rigoletto being the first, the second Tosca with Callas and Gobi and Corelli, and then for my third opera, I went back to Lucia di Lammermoor and back to the Bonning, Sutherland, Pavarotti, Milnes team.
The London Decca Group.
The London Decca Group. But I mean, because to me, it's the best one. And so therefore, Sutherland was very famous for her Lucia. She made her Met debut as Lucia, and it was a stunning success. But the recording, she did a couple of recordings, and this is the one that Bonning conducted, because early in her career, he was not considered good enough to conduct a recording.
There is another one?
The Molinari Pradelli came
Francesco
first, yeah.
Molinari,
And it's a great production, it had Carla Bergonzi and so on, but I prefer this recording, which is why I picked it. So Enrico, who was not a good guy, or is he a good guy who just is caught in a bad situation? The family is running low on money. He wants his sister to marry Arturo so that they will have money and protect their lands and castle. She loves the tenor. And Edgardo, as she says many, many times. And so your character, Enrico, is set up as being the evil one. I don't think you played him as evil. I think you played him as caught in a bad situation.
Well, in a recording, you don't have quite the same necessary point of view as you have to have on stage. In fact, I think I only sang Lucia on stage twice in my life.
Yeah.
But I worked hard on the recording. I mean, a story. What are you playing? Duet?
Pura Funestas Mania.
Oh, the aria. Well, there's a duet. You know, the morning of that recording, the duet with the baritone and the soprano, Bonning called and said, "Harold, you know, I've recently discovered an original autograph from Donizetti where the whole duet is up a step." Should we give it a go? Not a half a step, a whole step, and there's a modulation. You're not playing that part. But if you hear that, we did that duet up a whole step. I changed. There are some singers out there, I just opened all the E's because instead of D's, they were all E's. And I realized you could never do it on stage like that. You'd rip your throat out. But the recording is exciting.
It is.
And he said, "Do you think you can do it?" And I said, because, the way it's written, then it's D, D to high G together. That would mean E to high A. And I remember saying to him, if she can sing the high E, I can sing the A. I mean, E even for her, E above high C, that's a very high note. There's no question about that, even for Joan.
Yes. So let's hear from Act One, Enrico Zaria in Lucia di Lammermoor.
This I haven't heard.
Cruda funesta smania, tu m'hai svegliato in petto, e troppo orribile questo fatal sospetto, mi volgerà di fremere, solleva in fronte il crin, mi volgerà di fremere, solleva in fronte il crin. Colma di tanto miracolo e sera me nasce bria che d'amor si perfida svelarti un'idea se ti colpisse un fulmine, se ti colpisse un fulmine fulmen rio non va.
I know. Go buy the recording if you want to hear it all. I recommend it. Julian, set up number 7, please. Number 7. This is something I've never asked a singer, but it dawned on me during this music. To what degree did you ever interact a lot with a chorus, let's say at the Met, but it could be anywhere? The Met historically was known as the Met family, and in the cafeteria, you'd often have chorus members seated with leading artists, and there was a very strong relationship. But when I say interact with the chorus, I mean on the stage, in terms of creating roles or giving your suggestions.
Well,
about what
it
they
all
might do.
would totally depend on the part, and were you reacting to people in the chorus? Fanciulla, there was some of that.
Yeah, Act 1.
Tosca, Scarpia, it has to be kind of unaware of the chorus coming in, the end of the first act. Also, in most operas, Trovatore and other things where there's chorus, well, Rigoletto, I mean, he has to fight with the courtiers. He's thrown down to sing the Cortigiani. But Trovatore and other things, the singer is the captain or the boss, so he doesn't have a friendly, manly relationship with members of his troupe. He says, you go fight or shoot or whatever it is they're doing,
Yep.
and he just gives orders. No commander has a personal relationship with each of his people, and that's most of the time.
Yeah.
A few exceptions. Few exceptions.
Part of why it came to my mind is because the opera we were listening to was Lucia, and I was once working a rehearsal at the Met of Lucia, in which Pavarotti was to sing his 2 arias after the death of Lucia, and he was rehearsing it with the men of the chorus, and they were singing in a very upbeat way. And he stopped the rehearsal, he looked at them, and he said, "Are you happy?" And they said, "Yes, Maestro. Why are you happy? We're singing with you." And he said, "No, you're not happy. You are the men, and you're surrounding Edgardo, and he's about to kill himself. You're not happy." But I seldom saw him get angry, but he was really rather upset at that moment because he felt that the way that they were singing was ruining the effect that Donizetti wanted. So, speaking of Tosca, every opera lover, and I'm certainly one of those, can name his or her 5 or 6 greatest performances that they ever attended. I've been to thousands and thousands of performances, and certainly in my top 5 was in April of 1976. I was 19, and I was living in Italy at the time, but I was traveling to Vienna for the first time. And at that time, and even now, if you wanted standing room, you had to get a number, and you were given the number, and then you go to the theater, you take off the scarf, which is why I always wear scarves, and you tie it onto a pole in a spot. And no one would touch your scarf, and you would come back at performance time after sitting, hopefully drinking coffee and eating cake, to prepare for the performance. And it was Tosca with Grace Bumbry, Placido Domingo, Cheryl Milnes, conducted, I believe, by Zubin Mehta. It might have been Lauren Moselle, but I think Zubin Mehta. And I had seen Tosca performances before, including Maria Callas and Tito Gobi. And this one so entirely blew me away, and I had never experienced yet the Vienna State Opera audience, which is a very passionate, demonstrative audience. And it was incredible. And it, frankly, has ruined Tosca for me.
I did
Since
my
then.
best.
Although
To
she did
ruin
you
it.
in, she did you in, but no, I mean, I just saw a fantastic Tosca the other night with Sandra Radvanovsky at the Met, and I recommend it, and Joseph Calejo, who was in this chair last year. But it was, everything worked. You were 3 colleagues who were very much in sync. The audience, the orchestra, the chorus. The production was nothing special, but it didn't matter because these three artists were so entirely engaged and at working at phenomenal energy and passion that I thank you for that, because you're in the number one in my book and top 5 in my opera going history. So I really am very grateful to you for what you've done for me for opera. So I wanted to tell you that. There are
Thank you,
witnesses.
thank you.
And now what we're going to do is we're going to move our chairs a bit, and we're going to watch a little bit of Act 2 of Tosca with Raina Kabyavanska and Cheryl Milnes as Scarpia, and then we'll talk about
the
it after.
movie.
The movie, yes.
Io tenni la promessa.
Non ancora. Voglio un salvacondotto, onde fuggir dallo stato con lui.
Partir dunque volete.
Sì, per sempre.
Si adempia il voler vostro.
davanti a lui tremava tutta Roma.
Powerhouse.
Yes. Julian, set up number 8, please. The director of this was Gianfranco De Bosio, who I didn't know anything about. And what struck me, among many things in the film, is that because it's a film, they could do things you could not do on the stage. One of my favorites was having the shaky handheld camera from Scarpia's point of view, looking up at Tosca. And the camera really began to shake more as the character of Scarpia was beginning to fade. Another thing I really loved in this is that most Scarpias I've ever heard scream, Moio, Moio, Moio. Your Scarpia was actually dying, and therefore, Moio. It was whispered. Yeah. And
Grunt.
And this is why the first time I saw his Scarpia in 1976, it was a revolution for me because everything was considered differently. So what I wanted to ask you, we could talk endlessly just about this little scene, but how did you develop, evolve, and change your Scarpia through the years?
How did I?
Or maybe it just came with
well,
experience.
Obviously, experience
Yeah.
is a factor, of course. It depends a lot on the Tosca. In a way, there's two legitimate, right kinds of Toscas. The bigger, Horier type, if you'll excuse the word Horier type, it's also a legit way to do it. Or the smaller feminine, which Raino is, and Renata, and certain other Toscas, depending on physical size. And the Scarpia has to adjust what he does according to the woman, bigger, smaller. The first Italian Scarpia, I had done it with Goldovsky way back, before there were any kind of subtitles and super titles in English. I've done about 50 of them in English. The first Italian one was in Cincinnati, Zoo Opera, when it was outside. Dorothy Kirsten. Whatever one thinks of her, she was terrific on stage and taught me a lot of stuff. But hand kiss, when he goes out, we didn't see it in this scene. When she goes out in the first act and he starts to kiss her hand and she pulls away, I learned a lot of things from Dorothy. Again, that sponge. Somebody would take something, or they would throw out something, and I would use it right away. An interesting thing when we were filming, first day just walking in and kind of seeing the church, I noticed a lot of monks that came in, priests that came in, and were looking at the walls and the ceilings because there were paintings all over that they had never seen. Because for film, you have to have a lot of light. You have to have a lot more light for film than you do for live.
Yeah.
And they had never seen some of the frescoes there, and they were all admiring their own church because there was stuff in there that they had never seen.
So, I hope you don't mind, but it just occurred to me that if Callas was La Divina, Sutherland La Stupenda, Cabrier La Superba, Milnes is La Spugna, the sponge.
Come vuoi. Come vuoi.
Well, we've just seen you die by stabbing. You're now going to die by poisoning. And I mention this because very few opera singers do good death scenes. Really. And especially in Italian opera, because the great thing about Wagner is that you can sing for 6 hours, but when his characters die, boom, they're gone. In Italian opera, the operas are much shorter, but half of them are a death scene. So it requires, and I'm very serious, I know it sounds humorous, it requires a different kind of acting, maybe a different kind of realism as the body begins to seed life. And we just saw that here where as your voice faded, as would happen. In Simone Boccanegra, which regulars here know is among my very favorite operas, your death scene by poison and your recognition that it's all going and your last gesture will be to give power to your daughter Maria, but especially to her beloved Paolo. Nope. Not Paolo. Gabriele Adorno, thank you.
Adorno.
Paolo is the bad guy. And to give them power as your means of uniting Genoa. And so it's a beautiful scene. And Julian, if you would play selection number 8.
That's film.
Yeah. Well, this is actually no, from the Met.
Pensier da trista si serenisca
Maria, coraggio, a gran dolor t'appresta.
Qual accendi, o terror,
Per me l'estrema ora suona. Ma l'Eterno in tue braccia, Maria, sancite il voto estremo, questo serto dogal, la fronte cinga di Gabriele adorna. Tu, fiesco, compi il mio voler.
I have a lot to ask, but anything you want to say before I ask?
I don't remember when I saw that. Probably
Okay.
way back, only then, because I
Yeah.
haven't seen that in a long time. So I could really think that was somebody else.
Do you like
You
him?
know, you understand how
Yeah.
I say that.
Yeah.
It's somebody else.
Yeah.
I could believe that what was going on went on.
I can tell you a lot of what was going on behind the scenes. I've been saving it. Number 9, Julian, set up, please. Number 1, the the film director was Brian Large, who was one of the very, very best. And I would love to get him here some night to talk about putting opera on film, on tape, on video, whatever. This was a television broadcast, not an HD. And therefore, people were watching on smaller screens than they do now when they go to movie theaters. They were experiencing it not as a group, but typically in their homes. It was a Saturday matinee. It was a live radio broadcast in addition. And it was December 26, 1984. I was performance manager that day, and part of my job was to make sure that everything surrounding what you were doing on the stage worked. And because it was December 26th, and a lot of people were not there because of holidays, because of Christmas, because there had been a snowfall the night before, and there was huge amounts of snow outside the theater, and the loading dock of the Metropolitan Opera is on Amsterdam Avenue. And what the trucks did in the city was push the snow against the building, which meant that we could not have our trucks accessible for the live broadcast, television broadcast. There were cables leading from the stage into the truck where Brian was seated calling the shots of a live transmission. It was not like some of the others where they made a film, cut it after. There were all kinds of last-minute crises, many of which I had to be involved in. And one of them was this issue of the cables feeding to the stage, because if we couldn't hear Cheryl Milnes, it wouldn't matter about the acting because we were sending an opera out to the world. And so I was called for an emergency. I was wearing my traditional outfit, which was a tuxedo, and I had to go down into the snow for to help the cables get cleared, and the city had to be brought in, which I had to do, to make sure the snow was moved out of the way without damaging the cables. At the same time, around the corner on the south side of Lincoln Center in the winter is the Big Apple Circus. And at that time, they used elephants in the Big Apple Circus. And the broadcast, I think, went out at 1:30 or 2. This would be about 11:30, quarter to 12. You were already in the theater. And I had to go out and deal with the snow issue. The elephants were taken out for a walk. Let's put it that way. And they had to urinate. And Amsterdam Avenue goes this way. I think you know where I'm going. A yellow river cleared all the snow. So we didn't have to use the city services. But I was up to my waist in elephant urine. And you remember Dennis Kroniak, who was a wonderful member of the stage crew? He was standing high up in the loading dock, seeing me with the yellow bottom of my yellow shirt, now yellow shirt, waist deep in elephant urine. And he said, "Well, you did want to be in show business, didn't you?" And I mention this because when you watch these live broadcasts, you may not be aware that any and every technical glitch can happen. To, again, be blunt about it, the elephant urine destroyed all the cables. And we had to get new cables in place and test them, all the while the cast could not know anything about the drama happening because we wanted them to prepare in peace for their live international performances. So it came off perfectly. I wore a bathrobe for much of, I couldn't shower enough. And because I couldn't go out to the public smelling of elephant urine, so I took a very long shower. And backstage, they brought out sort of a kind of a costume for me that I could wear from Deflator Mouse. Sort of, and so I was receiving audiences in a Deflator Mouse costume while you were doing this wonderful performance. And so again, Cheryl Mills creates memories for me in every imaginable way. But again,
elephant urine.
but what I
That's a
wanted to
little
ask you, this scene, number one, was so beautifully filmed and beautifully performed. When you were simultaneously performing for 3,786 people in the theater and performing for a television broadcast, and you are aware that you are being seen from afar, but filmed up close so that your face, Brian captured your face as he laid in his last moments of life. And what was involved in the rehearsal, what was involved in your choices in making that performance happen simultaneously for the big theater and for the small screen?
Complicated question. Certain mechanical things. I'm an analyzer. You have to breathe. You have to breathe when you're dead. If you're not dead, you have to breathe very shallowly and try not to let anything move, which means shallow, more rapid. Shallow meaning you're not taking as much air in, so it has to be a little more rapid. I think I did see my eye quiver, although I suppose that could happen.
Yeah.
There are certain things about learning to let limbs just fall, and there's, excuse me, there is a thing about falling too where, well, I learned a lot from Goldovsky. There's some physical tricks, but then there is a point where you have to let yourself go.
Yeah.
You have to fall. And you can hurt yourself. You can bang your knees, your elbows. I think I broke the tip in the Pagliacci, which was a Zeffirelli thing. Stratus, we had the Tony Ornetta fight, and I went down the stairs and tumbled. I broke, I don't know, the tip of the, nothing to do with it, taped it back up, and it comes back together.
Yep.
And maybe it's given me trouble, I don't know. But there is a point where you have to let yourself go. And you can control it to a point, and then gravity has its way, blam, and you go. Rodrigo in Don Carlo does the same. And it's a problem doing a death scene in tuxedo or white, even tails and white tie, because you can't die out of the costume. In a costume, you can die, and audiences will accept that. But in street clothes, calling it tux, street clothes, fancy, you can't do certain things. So Io Morrò, the Rodrigo death scene in Don Carlo, you can't fall down on the stage. I did a concert Tosca in Tanglewood with Seiji conducting with Shirley Barrett. And it was tuxedo. And she stabbed, it was, semi-staged, but I couldn't fall. Well, you can find a certain way the audience will accept a certain drop of all energy. You have to learn how to do that mentally, of all energy out of your limbs, and you can stand. It's a problem. You have to keep yourself standing, enough muscle activity to stand and yet look totally inert. That's a little bit tricky, and it takes some practice and certainly a lot of analyzing. That's part of the answer to the question. Some of it is, I don't know. Some of your answer is, I don't know.
So, we're going to have one last clip. Speaking of Don Carlo's death scene, Rodrigo, in this one you're shot. And I'm not playing this to be jokey, but really because most artists, to be perfectly blunt about it, make their death scenes interchangeable. Cheryl Milnes does not. They are beautifully thought through. I was going to say executed, but I don't mean that. In that each one is in character in the nature of the death and extraordinary unto themselves. So let's look at it right now, and then I'm going to talk to you about education.
Something before?
Yes, sir.
I'll say something before. If you're shot, you can't be shot in the back because it looks like, oh, my aching back, I need some Doan's pills, or I need an Excedrin, or Tylenol or something. You have to be shot somewhere here.
Yeah.
So that you can play it.
Mm-hmm.
The back always looks like my aching back. I'd learned that by watching some of my older colleagues, and I thought, that doesn't look right. And so I never did it. I made sure that I was turned in such a way I knew where the rifle guy was, and that I would be shot here. Then you can grab the wound, and I would squeeze flesh so that it hurt. So I didn't have to fake, I made myself hurt.
Right.
Sounds a little stupid on the one hand, and yet I didn't have to fake a facial expression because it hurt.
And where's the packet of blood, stage blood? How does that work?
Well, various productions, some have none.
Yeah.
Some have none. Sometimes I did Hamlet, where I had changed, I had, a regular pirate type
Right.
shirt.
Yeah.
And then there was a duplicate that had a patch, Velcro, and when Laertes hits in the sword fight,
Yeah.
I could tear off the little square Velcro, and it was bloodied underneath. Lots of times they don't
Right.
bother with it.
Right.
So we're going to watch
We're
some
going to watch
Don Carlo.
Rodrigo, and then we're going to talk about education.
Per me giunto il dì supremo, non mai più ci rivedremo. Ci congiunga il Dio nel cielo,
parli tu di morte
già su me la foglione tremenda, io non seguo il rivale del re, il pieno giocatore delle piante, sono io, mi potrò prestar fe, le prove son tremende, i voli cui trovate mio poter, per la ribellion testimoni son chiari, e questo cavalchetto è prezzo e messo già, sperando tutto al re, chi serva la fiandra, ti serva la gran opera, tu la dovrai compire, un uomo secolo rinascer tu farai, regnare tu dovevi, ed io morir per te. La morte, anche mai, per me, la vendetta del re, cantare non poteo. Gran Dio! Ascolta, amore, aspetta, a San Giusto, domani, tutto ella sa, la terra mi manca,
I die good.
You do die good.
I'm a good dyer.
Well, and not only, but part of what I want to do tonight was to show the depth and the care of your artistry that comes in addition to being a fantastic singer with a great voice, which I started out with that as a given, and so did they. So I didn't want to talk to you about, what's it like to, etc., but really to show the depth of the artistry, because now you, like a couple of your colleagues, such as Martina Roya, Marilyn Horn, Grace Bumbry, have devoted a lot of your time to teaching and passing on all of this. And you have a foundation and a company, I guess it's called the Voice Experience.
Voice experience, yes.
And
indeed.
please tell us about that and how it began and what your goals are with that. And how do you transmit? Because I realized I began tonight talking about the conductors you worked with, some of whom knew Richard Strauss, knew Puccini, and you're passing on now to a generation who can say they knew Cheryl Milnes. But how does this culture get transmitted when our world has changed, and therefore the assumptions about art may have changed?
Well, those are huge questions, doctoral thesis questions. First of all, Voice Experience, my wife, Maria Zubas, who is a singer and an organizer, great organizer, founded Voice Experience about 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And it's really a training program. I have always done master classes my whole career, probably over 500 of them around the world, and wanted to pass on things that I learned. You said that I worked with conductors who knew some of these great composers of the past, which is true. In every generation we get away from the source, it's hard not to lose a little something. So I try, and I teach. We have also a very distinguished faculty, lots of New Yorkers, Met people, Juilliard people, Manhattan School of Music people as our faculty. We audition singers, and we have a younger program. With the biggest program is that post-college group. And also what happens is music schools, good music schools, are turning out singers in this country, and there's really no place for them to sing. I've said that about the Tucker auditions, and I said the same thing in China, where I just was judging a competition, high-level singing. And I said to a bunch of people, if they had been born in a German-speaking country, most of Switzerland, Austria, or Germany, they'd be in an opera house. Because every town over 50,000 or 60,000 in those countries has an opera house. And they do 7 a week for at least 9 months of the year. Well, do that math, 7 a week, 4 times 7 times 9, whatever that is. I flunked math, I think I said that before. At any rate, that's where the work is. But you have to learn the language and all of that. There's downsides.
Yeah.
So we saw that need. Colleges are putting out singers who want to sing. And of course, it still is that the Metropolitan Opera is the pinnacle for an American. If you're not at the Met, somehow you're not as good. Not totally true, but it is the pinnacle. It is the Met is the only full-time house that we have in the United States. I think you're aware of that. Chicago and San Francisco and Houston and certain other places do great performances, but they do not do 7 a week. The Met does 7 a week for 9 months, and then, well, it used to do the tour. I guess the tour doesn't happen
Ended in
anymore.
1986.
Or 86, okay, because I did a ton of them. My first year, Old House that you were talking about earlier, was still train.
Wow.
And there was something nicer about train travel than plane travel. Plane travel is faster. We understand that. It's a given. But you're kind of locked into your seat. You can't chum, you can't schmooze. Train, there's a company feel. And it was much more of a company feel
Yes.
my first year on a train, because then you were playing and boom, you were there, and then you went to your hotel room and you didn't chum as much. You didn't get to know the people
Right.
as well.
Right.
At any rate, Maria and I have seen the need for training people of all ages. We don't have a cutoff age. If somebody wants to come back, as she calls it, their 10,000-mile checkup, you know, they may be in a career. They want to work a particular role with me or just see how the voice is going. They can do that. Most of them are the 22 to 35 age, all aspiring for careers. Another thing that we do besides making them better is building audiences.
I was going to ask you about
This
that.
this
yeah.
American thing, you know, we're so language dumb in America. We are. I'm an American, so I can say that. I'm not terrific in languages. I get around and I tell singers, you got to have at least two. If you have more, that's great, but you got to have at least another besides your native language to operate. You can't do it with just English. At any rate, we saw the need, and we now do productions, mostly in Savannah, although we have a New York program, Chicago program, Florida program, and Savannah, Georgia program. That's the biggest. In fact, we're renting a house there now, although we still are Floridians. My wife is Greek, 100% Greek, and you know where Tarpon Springs is?
Yep.
You know, there's the biggest Greek community in the U.S. We're one suburb south of that, Palm Harbor.
So I must bring this around. I'm not closing it, but I happen to be working in Tarpon Springs the year that Michael Dukakis, a Greek American, was running against President George Bush, H.W. Bush,
Yes.
for president. And I was in Tarpon Springs, and Tarpon Springs, apart from the great Greek restaurants, is famous as the sponge capital of the United States.
It's true.
The Greek sponge diver,
It's true.
so La Spugna. How do you develop an audience?
We didn't have time for questions, did we?
We'll do questions. I just want to ask, how do you develop an audience?
How do you develop an audience?
Yes, you're saying about getting more audiences to opera.
Well, we like to say we don't do ugly and we don't do boring. Okay, that means cuts. Now, there are people who think, oh, you can't cut what? Mozart, Verdi, Puccini, and these people, you can't squeeze it down. And yet I think if any of them lived now, they would say, absolutely, part of social media and all kinds of things, that very different world now, they would say, absolutely, it has to be shorter. We just did the telephone there.
Yep.
Well, that's, you know, the Menotti piece, that's about 40 minutes or so. We got Giovanni down to 2 hours. We got Romeo and Juliet down to 2:15. Now, that's lots more than highlights. That, you know, that is the muscle of the opera, but that's not 3.5 hours. We did Marriage of Figaro. We got that down to 2:20. Well, Figaro is the world's longest opera.
It
I
is.
think maybe, I don't know, Wagner, maybe Meistersinger is longer. I don't know. But there's 190 some minutes of an uncut Nozze di Figaro. Well, we got it down to, I don't know, that's 3 hours. What is that? 3 hours plus. 3 hours plus is 190 minutes. We got it down to 2:20, 2:18 around there by squeezing. Now, it takes work. So that's what I mean by ugly and boring. We also do Broadway. We think American singers, you have to be able to sing everything. Zarzuela, Broadway, and we think we do it, we call it unplugged. That is, no microphone, no earphone, you know, no telephone thing that all Broadway now uses.
Right, sure.
Broadway started
The
out.
mic here and the wig.
Right.
Yeah.
Broadway started out with Alfred Drake and Howard Keel and John Raitt, who were really fine singers. They had sounds and they didn't have microphones. That all has changed, and I know there's a big thing about should we amplify the operatic stage. Well, that's not a discussion we'll have now. Sometimes the orchestrations are so thick that no matter how much juice the voice has, orchestra can always take out a voice. 80 to 1, 70 to 1. Those aren't very good odds. However, that's a whole other discussion. We're not going there.
But I do think we want to take some questions. What we're going to do with the questions is you're going to keep them brief. Once you ask it and say in a good loud voice, I will repeat the question so that our viewers out in the world will know what the question is, and then Mr. Milnes will answer it. So, who has the first question? Right there, brief question.
Yes. Mr. Milnes, where did you get your tie? I love your tie. No. No, my question
Oh,
is,
that's not the
can
question.
you talk a bit about the ways you have gotten chosen for roles? I guess the bigger question is does the management, the conductor, and the director jointly pick a singer, or how does that work in general?
I'll repeat the question. How did Mr. Milnes get chosen for roles? In other words, is it by a conductor, by a manager promoting it, his personal manager, or by the manager of an opera company, or perhaps by another cast member requesting you?
Complicated answer, complicated question, complicated answer, and probably not totally clear. Depends who's running the company. Often it's a conductor who runs a company, but not always. Lots of companies are run by someone who isn't so specifically in music, or they weren't a singer as such. All the above. Rarely do all three of those, the stage director, the boss of the company, and the conductor, rarely do all three pick. Just the logistics of getting them together at the same time. Usually it's the boss of the company, whoever that may be. Could be a stage director. Tito was the boss of a lot of companies, so Tito chose. Auditions, I do lots of judging, and I'm going tomorrow to do some stuff in Cleveland. It's a faulty system, unfortunately, but auditioning is the only one we have. If you change judges, you'd probably have some. You might not have a total different thing, but my one might be your 3, or your one might be my 4, that kind of thing. Might not change it totally, but they'd be different. It's a hard case to make, though, when singers don't win something. I personally was not a big audition winner. My career didn't come from winning auditions, but some careers do. And there are competitions in the world that promote hugely a career. Looking the part is a big deal, certainly in these years. When I started, I'm old enough to have sung with the last generation of all of the greats that I missed Delmonico, but that was, and Björling. I didn't sing with Björling because he died in 60. I was still on the farm in Illinois. But pretty much all the rest of them I sang with. Well, acting and looking like it. Oh, you want acting? You want more? Oh, you want more? Well, I mean, that's the old joke. But that's kind of where they were coming from. You want acting? Call Olivier. Yep. You want a high C? Call me. Again, kind of a joke. But that's where they were taught. Don't study music, study voice. We don't say that now. Study music. You sing with the music, and you love music, right, but know about music. Singers now tend to be much smarter musicians. That's a minor pet peeve of mine. There are instrumentalists and there are singers, and there are musicians in each group. The world says musicians, and they mean the orchestra. A minor pet peeve. Looking the part. There's a baritone that I discovered. I did some classes in Costa Rica. Fine singer. Piccolino. That'll limit. I mean, he's still a fine singer, but that will limit some of the things. You can't be shorter than the soprano. It's just, especially now with film and all of that, doesn't work as well.
Unless you get a cast of short colleagues.
Well,
But I mean that very seriously, because if you have a Don Giovanni and you're building your production around the man singing Don Giovanni, the other people cast are cast not only for their voices, but their physical
size.
compatibility with him.
It's
Yeah.
part of it. It's
Yeah.
part of it. Absolutely. Yeah, it's complicated. Lots of times people are hired and it was a mistake. I maybe shouldn't say lots of times. Sometimes. Somebody does an audition and they're good in an audition. There are people who audition well and don't perform as well.
Yep.
That's a problem. That's why I said audition is a faulty system. The best would be to be able to see everybody in some kind of a performance. But just logistically, it's impossible. If you're a young singer, what performance do you have? And who's paying the money to get the people to come to the performance? Mm-hmm. It's a problem. But auditioning, it's a big thing.
First lady with the red hair, brief question.
How do you go about getting into this program, a singer? How does a prospective
Oh,
singer?
our
Question
program.
is, how does a prospective singer go about getting into the voice experience program?
First of all, I hand you a piece of paper. Audition. We have auditions. Actually, what day is this? Thursday?
Today is November 1st.
Thursday, right?
Yeah,
Thursday.
Yeah.
A week from tomorrow, we fly back to New York, and all day Saturday a week, we hear auditions. So, I mean, that's really the long and the short of it. And depending on age and experience and vocal emission, what do they have? What do they show? Face, language, body language, all of that. We decide, in some cases, nowhere near good enough, find another outlet, or there's something there. One phrase that I use, very difficult, is inspire, a normal word, inspire within reality. That's a toughie. Because we can't see DNA. We have both heredity and environment. They're both important. Environment, you kind of can see environment, but DNA, even a laryngologist looking at a throat, they know if you have an infection, but they can't look at your throat and say, you're a terrific singer. They can't. That's the magic, in a way, if you want to use the word magic, of singing. The sound of the human voice without amplification, without the sound guy futzing around with the Hertz cycles and overtones and volumes and all of that. We teach people you got to be in control of what you do. And that means turn on face and body language, all of that. So audition is really and there's a website, and I can give you something which would have the website. I'm happy to do that.
Voiceexperience.org, and voice experience is just one E there.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
VOICEX.
Yes.
When you're doing an opera during a season, quite often one of the other principals changes. You're singing with Callas one day, Grace Bunbury the next. How does your own performance change when your colleague has changed?
The question is, when during the run of an opera production, sometimes your colleague might change from one night to the next, sometimes one act to the next. Seriously. And how does your performance change based on who you suddenly are playing in front of?
Depends on the opera. The Puccini, much more gutsy, verismo as they call it, much more real. The further back you go, the more idealistic, and Mozart much more stylized is the right word. It would also depend if you have a rehearsal then the smart performer looks at the changed singer, and you make some decisions. Like I said that Scarpia, if I'm playing to a big, hoary type, appropriate, excuse the word, but Tosca.
Hoary.
Is one set of things that I would do. And if it's not the ladylike, as I said, Renata and Raina and many others, much more ladylike, which is also perfectly valid kind of Tosca, that's a very different Scarpia. Mozart, Giovanni, you don't change so much. Changes a lot. It depends on the opera. Fanciulla, the Delmonico production, which it's also filmed, Barbara Daniels was a player, is a player. She said, whatever you want. And then Dimitrova, what was her?
Gaina Dimitrova.
Gaina Dimitrova did one or two. Well, Barbara had said, you want to fight, come on, whatever, I don't care. Dimitrova said, you know, you can't touch me here and here and here and here. How do you have a fight if you're inhibited as to where you can touch? That was problematic. But that was Fanciulla, that was Puccini, which is much gutsier and much more verismo. If it had been Ponchielli or early Verdi, Trovatore, much more stylized, not much difference. So it depends a lot. And I found, well, certain, like we've talked about Scotto before, and Leone Rieseneck, who was not really an Italian singer, but I did ballo in Vienna with her, and she really, in your eyes, you could play that. She wasn't looking at your ear or, you know, at the exit sign or off somewhere. And a lot of singers would do that. You couldn't get a real sizzle in their eyes. That's harder to play. When they give you something to fight back with, that's good. Then the audience, of course, you get lots more.
Rieseneck was extraordinary, among the most beloved artists I've worked with. She had gorgeous blue eyes, apart from anything else. And you'd look at them and you'd just fall for her completely. Magnificent artist. And if you don't know Leonie Rieseneck, especially young people horribly don't know who that was, you want to look up Leonie Rieseneck. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Do you have any particularly favorite roles that you did?
Question is, do you have any particularly favorite roles that you did?
I smile. I have to think because I'm a literal person. There's an upside, you get a better answer. There's a downside, takes longer. That's the downside. Well, the two bad guys, Scarpia, Iago. Iago, the psychotic, Scarpia is not. I probably did those more often, 150 or so of each. Giovanni, who doesn't have the most to sing, but he has to be the center pin. If you don't have a great Giovanni, doesn't matter if the others sing well, you don't have an opera. Boccanegra, powerhouse. Doesn't have the hit tunes that some of the other Verdi things, that Traviata, Trovatore, Carmen, Aida, didn't have the hit tunes. So the average public doesn't love Simone the way I did, the way you do.
Yeah.
Hamlet.
And was Thomas.
Thomas. That's a long story, Mr. Thomas. Do we have time for a story?
We have time for a story. Okay.
Mr. Thomas, when he wrote it, that was pre-Massenet. He was one of Massenet's teachers. So we're talking 1850, when Scala wasn't yet built, and the Met, of course, wasn't built. Paris was the center of opera in the world. It was Paris. He had Hamlet live. He changed the plot. Well, for English speakers, meaning Brits, Americans, Canadians, Australians, so forth, you know, Shakespeare is sacrosanct. You don't just, well, I think I'll have him do this instead of what he wrote. Yeah. But the French don't feel quite that way. So Mr. Thomas left us with the piano vocal score, Hamlet Lives. And long live the new king of Denmark, blah, it ends like that. He took it, is the way I heard the story, he then took it to London, the Royal Opera House, which existed then, and presented his version, and they said, this is Shakespeare land. You can't just do that. He has to die. You have to rewrite this. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that Mr. Thomas begrudgingly, as a Frenchman who didn't respect the Shakespearean point of view and the flawed hero, the Othello and Lear and all of the characters that Shakespeare wrote about, he didn't care about changing it, but he rewrote it. And there's a bunch of versions which has left Hamlet kind of hanging in the corner. And there's no big tenor part. There is a tenor part, but it's a small tenor part. So no tenor says, and tenors we know have more clout than, good tenors have more clout. Good tenors and good sopranos have more clout than mezzos, baritones, and basses. That we understand that. It's a given in our industry. It's true. So no tenor says, I want to sing Hamlet to do the tenor part. Plus he left us with, and I have like 5 versions with different conductors. Every conductor had a little different way of doing it, because what Thomas wrote for the London version doesn't work. He didn't treat it, I don't think he treated it conscientiously. I think he resented having to change it. And so it's not done as much, but I've done it in English and in French. It's interesting. In English, much more Shakespearean. Mm-hmm. In French, grander. Same notes, mm-hmm. Same tunes.
Is it language that makes it grander in French?
I don't know what it is that makes it. Shakespeare was archaic English, of course, and the translation, I don't know, it just seemed. In music, in art, mm-hmm. The word something seems. You look at a picture, it seems. To you, one thing, to me, to you, another thing. It seems. It seemed more Shakespearean in English mm-hmm. and grander in French. Why? Maybe language.
Yeah.
To be or not to be, être or ne pas être, mm-hmm. and all that stuff. Non essere, essere or non essere.
So
they also did it in Italian.
I've done this series for years now. This has really been one of my favorite nights. I am so honored that you came, that you communicate to us what you do, because not every artist can. And I think I figured out why. I was just sitting here and I figured it out why. You grew up on a dairy farm. Verdi grew up on a dairy farm. It must be something about the milk.
Thank you. Thank you.